¿Qué tal, mis queridos amigos de Wine Club? Hoy vamos a tener una charla espectacular con el sommelier más grande del mundo, que es Andreas Larsson. En cualquier momento ya va a estar con nosotros y viene a hablar sobre diferentes temas, que es el tema de la cata, cómo aprender a entender el vino desde una cata ciega. Y bueno, va a estar muy interesante. Espero que les guste. Amigo, gracias por estar aquí. Platícanos. Quería preguntarte porque la idea es que nos compartas esta manera de vivir el vino, de sentir el vino, de catar, y en ese orden de ideas quería preguntarte, ¿cómo cata Andreas Larsson, el sommelier más grande del mundo?
Más grande un talla para non calidad. eh, en primer lugar, normalmente me prepararía para una degustación mañana. Para lo hacer en español, necesito un poco más tiempo. Iniciamos en español y si necesito, vamos a lo hacer en inglés.
Claro,
si tengo de preguntas demasiado complicadas, pero iniciamos un poco en español.
Venga, perfecto. Y te agradezco el esfuerzo, Andreas, porque sé que estás intentando mejorar tu español y te lo celebro y te lo agradezco. ¿Ok? Entonces, platícanos, ¿cómo cata Andreas Larsson normalmente? ¿Cómo es técnica?
Como técnica, para mí es una cuestión de memoria, es una cuestión es una cuestión de emociones, es una cuestión de estar analítico, porque la degustación es una ciencia exacta, es un arte de apreciación, pero degustamos para disfrutar, que más importante que analizar. Normalmente hablamos de personas con cerebro izquierdo o derecho. Yo creo que los cerebros de izquierda son ingenieros, matemáticos, pensadores. Los cerebros derechos son más bien artistas, músicos como yo, emocionales. Yo creo que necesitamos combinar los dos. Estar analítico, recordar mucho, pero al mismo tiempo estar emocional, pero y yo creo que también perdón. Vamos a cambiar un poco un inglés.
Inglés, sí, cámbiale el inglés, no te preocupes.
Okay. It's been a while since Spanish, and to think and to change the and anyway, since last year, my Spanish is better because I spent so much time with Netflix and all the Spanish and Mexican series. So I was every day I was watching that. Puta chicana de pesadilla.
I know. Yeah, but don't worry. Let me tell you that you are speaking much better day by day, and next time when you come to Mexico, I will prepare some classes in Spanish for you. But you are doing a great job, my friend. Don't worry.
Yeah, but to really speak freely about everything else and around it, well, this will be easier because I thought it was tomorrow, so I was preparing, but it was obviously today. Coming back to it, it's very much to me about the two sides of the brain: being emotional, enjoying it, being technical, analyzing it. I was always more of the enjoying. I was more of the musician or the poet than the mathematician. But I think we need both. And what is interesting above all, it's to me, tasting is so related to so many other things. Because when I learned wine, it was so much about you smell something and you get an emotion which takes you to a place. And in our everyday life, we don't really use the nose. I mean, we have to use the sight, the hearing, but the taste is really our ancestors. It was more important to them, of course, because if food was fresh, if you could drink the water and so forth. But when we wake up and we learn how to use our nose, it takes us to so many places. And I think in terms of memory, nothing else is as related to aromas, to the memory as as aromas. And I think with wine, when you taste, of course, it's very important. I always try to tick all the boxes. Of course, when you learn to taste, you start with the nose. It's a red wine, it's a white wine, it's a light color, it's bright, blah, blah, blah. You know how to do that. Of course, if I taste, I taste 30, 40 wines, I don't write down, color and stuff, because if I have to publish a tasting note, I will write down what's important. But when we learn to taste from A to Z, color, aromas, pure nose, is it fruity, is it herbal, is it spicy, da da da, taste, is it light to full? Of course, it's not very easy to do. I mean, it's not, we can never deduct tasting to just these terms, but I think always doing it the same way, thinking about all the factors will make us, I mean, I grew up with, I think most of us, we were taught tasting that way. And when I look at the older generation, sometimes, they wrote about a wine, they spoke about a wine, they say, oh, it's very noble, it's very fine, it said nothing about the wine. But to learn this very much, it's red fruit with a hint of oak, there's herbal aromas, spicy aromas, the palate is light to medium bodied. It's, of course, we can put more flesh to the bones in terms of, if I have to write a blind taste 80 wines from Côte d'Rhône, it wouldn't be poetic. I will write down what I find, I will put a score, because it's, if I have to recommend 3 wines in a glossy magazine, of course, I will speak very much in a different way about it. It will be much more about this fantastic estate, blah, blah, blah. So, but I still think, every time I taste, I do everything from the color to the nose, to the palate, to the conclusion, which gives us an idea. And I think repetition is very much the source. Repetition is very much the key of getting it right, or getting it less bad, let's say.
Yeah. So in your opinion, it's very important to have like a order, agreed or kind of format to follow and to fill the boxes, and also repetitions, no? As much as you repeat doing the tasting of the same grape, I would say, it's the way that you're going to be better, right?
Yes. Repetition and repetition, memorization, but also not, as I said, it's not only the analytical, because why I started to taste is actually because I like wine. And sometimes my girlfriend tells me, but you like if you don't have to be a taster, if you don't have to teach people, it's easier to say, I don't drink wines from the New World, I don't do that, I only drink Pomerol. And she tells me sometimes, your problem is you like all wine. Of course, there are wines I don't like, but I have to be able to taste and, be fair to all wines. Then if I choose to drink this or that at home, it's not, it doesn't matter, but you have to be fair to all wines, and understand them for what they are.
In terms of, you were saying about the repetition, but you also said about memory. So how do you train your memory? Because to be honest with you, I used to have a very good memory. Nowadays, I think that I'm not really good in a memory. How do you train your memory?
Imposible a decir. I don't know.
It's just a matter of repetition.
That is probably, I know that Sherabase, our friend who's not with us anymore, but he had a memory coach before the competition. And he went with through his garden, and he asked Gerard to tell him about, the 13 regions of Germany. And this guy wasn't in wine. And the guy managed to remember them, because he said, well, I look at the apple tree and I thought of, so I think there are memory coaches, but that's rather a question for a psychologist or for someone else. I think I always had a fairly decent memory, but I wouldn't remember things unless I was interested. That's kind of my problem. And some people, now, that's a very difficult question. That's a very difficult question, actually.
No, it's okay. I understand, because everybody here, we can have a different capacity in terms of memory. I used to, as I said, I used to have a better memory. Nowadays, I think that I need to do more repetitions. And also because my memory, I mean, in terms of blind tasting, I'm very rusty. When I used to compete, I do like a lot of training. Nowadays, I just enjoy the wine and that's it.
But I think it's also a question of, I think it's more difficult to learn new things as well. Because I was recently tasting 2020 Bordeaux on Primeur. And I mean, I tasted 400 wines or so. Of course, some of them, you know, if you would ask me, what do you think of that wine? But if you would ask me about all the top wines, I don't want to sound snobbish now or something, but, you know, of course, I tasted them over the years. You know the names of these appellations. If you would ask me, how was Chateau Palmer 2020? How was Mouton? How was... I remember them because I've seen the labels, I've seen the names, I've tasted those wines over the years, and I could easily remember my tasting note and my score for 100 or 150 or maybe 200 of them. Then the new stuff, which is interesting or very good, but you know, if I didn't see the names before, if you know, if I would go to a tasting in Austria and someone would mention 30 or 40 names in German and those vineyards, I would remember it because I've been tasting those all over the years. If you're not a German speaker and you see these names, it would be, you know, very, very, very difficult.
Yeah, yeah.
Learning new things is what is more difficult. And of course, in your habits, because I think habits and repetition, that's something very good. As I said, always do it in the same, you know, it's a question of deduction. You know, what is it? You know, if I taste the wine, this is not Riesling, this is not Chardonnay, this is not Sauvignon. What can it be? Less aromatic, but not Chardonnay. What can it be? Pinot Blanc? Could it be Trebbiano? You know, it's... So I always think again that the deduction is the key.
Maybe you don't remember this, but when I met you, some long time ago, I asked you how you become a very good taster, and you answered me. I mean, your answer was like, I make connections with the wine. And I say,
that sounded like something I would write in a book, but you know, with good wine, it's easier. With good wine, it's easier too, because if you would come for lunch, you would bring Chateau Latour 82. I would probably say, this is Latour 82, and then some people would think you're a genius. But with that kind of wine, it's much easier. If you would bring an interesting Barbera Nebbiolo blend from Mexico, I wouldn't find it blind. Yeah. So it's a question of, and occasionally when you do these tastings, I did it sometimes for students, you know, I was blind tasting in front of them and to see how I think. And I asked the people just not to bring anything too funky or too weird. And I would say, well, this must be, so if I found a Sancerre, they would think I'm a genius. But once you tasted Sancerre, and you know that aromatics, it's still a bone dry wine. It's not Sauvignon from it. It's rather French because of the dryness and you know, you learn to do it. It's a question of routine. And when I say I connect to wine, that sounded pretty ambitious. I don't know if I said that but yeah, with great wine, it's easy to have this emotional memory. You know, if you have a few top 3 wines of your life and you taste it, that's much easier.
No, but you know, I agree with that point, with that thought, because sometimes it's with the people, no? When you remember someone that probably you don't know even the name, but you saw these people everywhere, and you know that you know him because a reason, because anything, and that's what I sometimes when I do blind tasting, I know, oh, this is Sancerre or this is Barolo, because there is something that you could find in the beginning and you make the connection. That's what I was trying to think about, this kind of connections with a special aroma, with the special tannins, or I don't know, something that make this connection.
Well, and I think that's also you know, when we speak about the wine being typical, I love to taste new wines and new things, but I think great wine has a style. If you taste Chablis, you know it's Chablis. You don't have to love it, the style, but you know it's a bone dry Chardonnay without oak influence. To 90% is no oak, and it's really nicely firm and grippy on the palate. The Nebbiolo or the Barolo, that's a style. You have modern styles or traditional styles, but goddamn, it's Barolo. And I think that's easier to know by great wines. Then there are interesting wine, and to me, I think the wines I prefer are the wines you recognize because there's a style, there's a typicity,
Yeah.
instead of a varietal wine, which it can be good, it can be refreshing, it can be a lot, but well, it takes us back to the fact that great wines or good wines or wines with a style and personality are easier to recognize.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. And for example, in my experience, sometimes I had some problems with some appellations that for me could be. It depends of the producer of the kind of appellation quality. Like for example, how do you define between Sancerre, Chablis, and Alvarinho from things like, I mean, all of them are very mineral. All of them, some of are high acidity level, but for me sometimes it's very difficult to understand each one of them. So how do you recommend to do this?
Well, first of all, when it comes to Chablis and Sancerre, something I tell my students, something which is very easy. Uh, First of all, they are dry. Let's say Sauvignon. Even I could take the best examples. I mean, I like Sauvignon from other places, whether it comes from New Zealand or Chile, but if we taste this next to a Sancerre, they will be sweeter. I mean, of course, producers going back to making a drier style, but the tradition for dry wines in France for these appellations is still less than 1 gram of sugar per liter, or less than 2 grams. Uh, and tasting it side by side, it's obvious that they are one size slimmer and a bit more drier. And when I say firm, I mean nicely firm on the palate, because you like that salivating sensation. Aromatically, of course, it's, if you take a good Sancerre, it's always more discreet aromas. It's not as, I think a lot of, let's say, New Zealand, I mean, the standard stuff, not the top stuff, it's so in your face, with the passion fruit, the herbal, the grassy stuff. So you certainly feel, if a Sauvignon has gotten more sun than what it gets in Sancerre. And then if you say difference between Sancerre and Chablis, it's funny because if you look on a map or you learn wine, you think, Chablis is in eastern France, it's Burgundy, Sancerre is in the west of France, it's Loire. The two appellations are very close if you look at a map, and they belong to the same, the Paris Basin, which is all on limestone. And someone who makes a Sauvignon in a less aromatic style, and you say Chablis blind, someone would say, oh, I mean, my God, it's a difference between Sauvignon and Chardonnay, but they can be very close stylistically. Chablis, I would say the same thing. When you get that very not so aromatic, you get more of the oyster shell, you get the almond, you get the citrus, you get the purity, and not so much flamboyance, but bone dry and that salivating sensation. But I mean, the most important, I think the good lesson would be take one Marlborough Sauvignon and one Sancerre, taste them and think about the dryness, and it's obvious. That's the easiest thing to do. Then, of course, more and more styles are changing. People used to say that Sauvignons from there are too much, or Chardonnays from there are too oaky. I mean, if we speak about Chardonnay, everyone used to think, I mean, 15 years ago, we all said that California Chardonnay was very much about being big, being creamy, lush. Oak was always involved more or less. And but of course, today, if you taste some of the hip stuff from Santa Barbara, these guys, they love Burgundy. It's very gentle oak. If you would say this is a Chablis Premier Cru, and it's someone in Santa Barbara who loves Chablis, it's not obvious.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as much as tasting, of course, it's about following the trends and see what's going on in fashion. I mean, in terms of trends.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest part, because you have to be, with the trends as well. As you mentioned, like I was speaking with Rash Parv, and that is producing wines in Central Coast in
Yeah.
Gundi wines. And when you try their wine, I mean, his wines is the wines are very close. And I would say, no, it's not like the regular style from California, no, that very deep purple color, a lot of concentration, a lot of fruitiness. It's more like this other style. And we have here another question that Ilar is asking. How can we choose from all wines from the world? Because which ones do we need to, as a sommelier, do we need to have in mind, and which ones we can take out of our, or not consider in our memory? Because that's a lot of appellations.
Well, when I was preparing more for, I mean, as much as I still love to taste, but when I was preparing competitions, I always had the structure of sorting wines into A, B, and C level. And I would say A level, that's a style you have to know. A level, it's a Cabernet Sauvignon based left bank Bordeaux. You should know that. Uh, A level is Riesling Cabernet from the Moselle. You have to know that, which is, a style which is fairly easy to recognize. You have to know Chianti Classico. You have to know Rioja, traditional Rioja Reserva. And I mean, those, the most focus were on them. And I did sessions when I was, only tasting A style to, you have to pinpoint these. Then when we call the B level, it's, of course, it's individual, what we think are essential wines. But that's wines that are not not the most classical, not the Barolo, not other varieties from, let's say, Sauvignon Blanc from Steiermark in Austria. That's not the super classic, but it's another style. And if we go to, I see Andres is online.
Yeah.
To him, A level is, of course, you have to know Malbec from Mendoza, even though there are 10,000 styles. I would say then B level would be to recognize, other varieties from Mendoza, but Malbec. So not the first most obvious, but the second choice. And then for C level, that can be, fun and new things. But if someone would give me again, Gamay from Australia or a Nebbiolo from Australia, vinified in a Beaujolais style, I mean, it's very, very difficult. It's fun to taste some of those too, and if you happen to know it, I mean, it's important to be open-minded to see what's going on and which styles that are changing and what people are doing. But the first thing I think, to learn to taste and to learn to blind taste, it's to focus first on recognizing the most, I mean, because those styles are the fundament for all other wines. And then, of course, you don't have to be old and boring and say that you only drink these wines, but it's easy to get a grip on when you focus on those, and and to do it by repetition. If someone pours you, you will know, okay, this will be left bank Bordeaux, right bank Bordeaux, Rioja Reserva, Chianti Classico, Barolo, Mosel from the Riesling, dry Grüner Veltliner, Austria, Mendoza Malbec, Napa Cab. Then you have less parameters. There will be classical stuff, not so much funky. It will be so much easier to find. And I think that when I went out of sommelier school, I was a really good taster. I mean, I was better at pinpointing things sometimes because my hard drive, it wasn't as big as today. So when what you read about and what you tasted, I say, oh, this must be Nebbiolo, blah, blah. You didn't know as much as producer and stuff, but the world was bigger. You had these, 20, 25 important styles, appellations, regions in your head. Today, the world is expanding and there are so many styles everywhere. So sometimes when you're not spot on, there's an explanation because you tend to think too much.
Yeah, I understand. So, when I was speaking with rush part, he's always very focused in the taste, in the palate, and but some of them are more in focus in the smell, in the nose. So in your experience, what is more important for you when you do a blind tasting? Smell, the nose, or the palate, the taste?
Both, actually, but I think that it's easier to speak about aromas. If you do a tasting class with people, you can say, you know, it's a red fruit, it's a dark fruit, and people say, oh, I smell cherry. Ah, you said plum. You know, picking up a lot of aromas is fairly easy. Well, in some wines, the worst thing you can do is to do a Chablis tasting because Chablis you only have oyster shell or lemon zest and green apple. I mean, it's not, there's not so much going on, but I think it's easier to say. But speaking about the texture is more difficult because if you do the WSET and the classic stuff, you learn this is light, medium bodied, full bodied. You know, of course, we know in reality there's the spectrum is so much vaster than that. So I think it's important to put words to it. But I fully agree that the textural quality of a wine is of course as important. And in terms of blind tasting, I pick up a lot there because, of course, you will feel when we think about origin, particularly in terms of alcohol, in terms of dryness, in terms of tannin. If I would, you know, if we knew it was a Cabernet Sauvignon tasting, we would have fairly aromatically fairly similar things, or but that would really be a question for the palate to say that this is rather a cooler climate or a moderate climate, more old world school, and this would be these grapes come from a much warmer place. And same thing when I mentioned the dry classic appellation like Sancerre and Chablis, they will be dry. You won't have residual sugar in there. So I think that kind of comparison of doing a, you know, cooler style Chablis, let's say, but Chardonnay, let's say, but next to Chablis, and the Chablis would still appear drier.
Okay.
So it's very much, I mean, both are, of course, very important. And I think, again, when it comes to the greatness of a wine, of course, you can have complexity but let's say if we taste a good Burgundy, or we taste a few good Burgundies, you know, with some maturity, nose will be more or less seductive if you taste, let's say, 10, 12-year-old wine. But then the difference between a Village or a Premier Cru or a Grand Cru, that will be more on the palate. That would be more about the power. It would be more about the length, even if they aromatically are pretty similar.
Okay. Okay. I got it. I got it. Very nice. Um, I mean, usually when you, for example, when you were competing in a contest, you have kind of ritual before competing, like in terms of tasting, like I don't know, I don't know if you have any in case before the competition.
I lit the fire, I sacrificed some animals, I threw them out from the top floor of.
That's what I thought. That's what I thought.
I prayed to the dark side. No, and no, not before. I mean, in terms of tasting, I was always just trying to taste as much as possible, but always, of course, to do it in a structured way. To what I said about the A level, the B level, the C level wines. Of course, in terms of the speed, if I taste in 3 minutes or 4 minutes or 5 minutes, learning to skip the bullshit and get to the point. But that wasn't particularly before a competition. The best routine was not to think about, because I always say to candidates, sometimes, you know, they're outside, you know, they did the quarterfinals, they're outside the room, they look in the books and they write things down. Once you're there, you know, 2 weeks before the competition, you don't need to study. Everything should be there. And if you the morning before look up a new apple, you won't remember it because you're too screwed up from all the stress and everything. So the best routine to me was not to do anything, not to think too much about it, just to be in a good mood, feel good, be relaxed, be well rested.
Yeah, that's a pretty good, I mean, recommendation for all the people who likes the competitions. And usually, how many wines do you recommend to taste by day? in a.
I mean, as many as you can. That it depends, of course, of your everyday work and the opportunity to travel and to taste. To me, my most formative years, well, I still taste a lot because I do all the blind tastings and stuff, but in my most formative years, it was roughly 10,000 wines per year, which makes
10,000 wines per year. Wow.
30 wines a day, which is not that much, because if I would say that, it sounds, but if you go to a tasting several times a week, you can taste 50 wines here, 60 wines there. I still do probably 7,000 to 8,000, because every month in my blind tastings I do minimum 500-600, and then you do other tastings, like I said, Bordeaux Primeur with friends, with a bit less maybe during the COVID year, but of course everyone can't. I mean, everyone don't have that opportunity, but the more the better. But still, I think within the format of being able to remember or say something about each wine. Only go and do, like, you know, taste as many as possible wouldn't do good either.
Yeah, just to be more focused, but as much as you can in the same way of being focused, no?
Yeah.
Okay. So I will give the opportunity, because here we have some people. You know, Olivier, this is the president of the Paraguayan. Actually, he's saying that he prepared an asado before the tasting. I think that's a pretty good idea, and Andres probably will do the same in Argentina. But maybe, guys, if you want to open your microphones and ask something directly to Andreas, could be awesome. This way we can participate. Quien sea. Venga, Deliver.
Hello, Andreas, how are you?
Ça va et toi? Tout va bien?
Ça va, toujours, ça va bien, toujours, bien sûr. En español por todos los otros. Mira, oui. Una pregunta. Cuando haces blind tastings, haces de vinos, pero haces de destilados también. ¿Te cuesta mucho hacer un blind tasting de destilados, o preferís hacer un blind tasting de vinos?
Siempre de vinos, pero alcohol es muy duro con la boca, simplemente. Cuando yo degustando 30, 40 cognac Armagnac es finito. Me hacía de calor en boca. Vinos yo puedo degustar 100, 150, 200 un día, sin problema. Pero es importante degustar todos los productos también. La sola bebida que no degusto normalmente es la cerveza. Yo creo que es una cosa completamente diferente. Los destilados, la tequila, cognac, whisky, todo me gusta mucho, pero la cerveza es una... Se por beber, no por degustar, para mí.
Claro. Ok, muy bien.
Thank you.
Pili, Andrés, Fernando, ¿quieren preguntar algo? Sin pena. Pili, mujeres primero, dice.
So, Andreas, well, I just made the first question, so I'm just thinking of more questions. I have a lot of questions, actually, but well, I'm training also I'm starting with the grapes, and I think the system, how you mentioned you taste a lot of wines, but I have some problems tasting so many wines at once that my memory, maybe it's a problem of my memory, that I have problems to remember some of the aromas or the main characteristic of some wines. So I would like just to give me some advices. That's why I just asked you how you remember, how you just your memory, you associate with fruits, because some aromas, for me, I have lived in many different countries, they smell very different in different countries. So how you associate some aromas with the wines, specifically the main aromas?
Well, I think a lot of wines, there's something which is always, you know, you taste it and you get, ah, that's it. And I think it's basically you should write it down, because I remember very much. Now, I don't think I can show pictures now, but I did for the students when we did day one at sommelier school. Of course, a lot of people working in a restaurant, reading too much, you know, starting early morning, they're not necessarily the most academic, you know. So I made pictures of grape varieties. I think the book Os Clark and Margaret Rand did about varieties, it's brilliant, because when you see this picture of, you know, blackberries, you see smoke, you see salami, you see meat, you see dark plums. If I would see that picture and someone say, which grape variety is this? I would say this is Syrah. If you would see the raspberries, the peach, the clove, the mild spices, the elegance, okay, which variety is this? I would say this is Pinot Noir. So I think being able to visualize things, I mean, some people have more of a musical memory. If you hear music, you have perfect pitch, you can analyze what it is. Others have more of a visual memory. So I think it's just up to your own, you know, using whatever is your strongest talent to remember it. And of course, by repetition, tasting it, you write down, you know, if you taste 20 wines from Bordeaux, left bank, let's say, you will say, in these 20 wines, you will always find the blackcurrant or cassis, because that's the main component of the Cabernet. Then a bit more oak here, a bit less oak there, a bit more green here, but I think it's to write it down, or, you know, seeing it, because sometimes if I taste something, I know what it is instantly, because it's just like seeing a picture. If I show you, if you're not a chess player and I show you an opening, you will easily say, this is the Sicilian opening, or this is the Queen's Gambit declined. A chess, you know, player would see that instantly. If I write down a few musical notes on a sheet, most people will say, what is this? I would say this is an F sharp minor flat 5, because I've seen it. So I think it's about the repetition of learning. You know, if someone reads music, you can see something just dots on these lines, and what the hell is this? You show it to a good player or a great player, and they will just like play it. So I think it's about the repetition of doing it, getting routines of writing things down or memorizing it, which will lead to one day you will, that's it. So it's very much about these, when people speak about it takes 10,000 hours to be good at something. It's very much that repetition and doing it a lot.
Okay, thank you.
If that answers your question, you know, it's...
Yeah, sure.
Perfecto. ¿Alguien más, Andrés?
Sí, gracias, Marcos. Hey, Andreas, good to see you again.
Been a while.
Every 2 months, and now it's been like 2 years.
Yeah.
Hey, I think a good thing to comment on would be, what are your thoughts for people who are considering competition in terms of how should they train, and what they should be looking at?
Well, first of all, just do it. It's something which is fantastic. I mean, it's a great experience. And I mean, I think the reasons the competition started was actually for people to be able to learn more and you know, meeting and voila, to get better in all fields. How, you know, exactly how, that's a quite long process on how to prepare for everything. It's almost beyond the subject if we speak about but if we stick to the tasting, I would, well, basically come back to the same things again. It's very much as trying to grab all the opportunities to taste, to do it, you know, to follow, to tick the boxes in the grid, to have a format, and once you've learned that, of course it will be easier, even if you don't take notes. You taste 5-6 wines during a dinner, but you still have a very clear idea because you analyze them the way you were taught to write or to read. And of course, I mean, tasting is one of the, I mean, it's one of the very important things if we speak about within the fields of competition. But then it's also, of course, all the other things, the service, the food and wine, which are. So what I wanted to come to, it's well, first of all, I think it's just to do it, then to find a kind of format and structure on how to prepare for the actual competition, which is I mean, that's a vast subject in itself. And I think you did, Marcos, with the Mexican sommeliers, at least you had some master classes with Søren, who actually made it his profession or made it part of his profession to prepare and train. And I think that started with me, actually, because I had several friends, and I mean, I know in some countries and areas, the competitors, they don't speak to each other. I mean, they had 2 top candidates, and they were 2. I was always very good friends with my competitors. We trained together, we practiced together, and then we said, well, may the best man win. There were no hard feelings if I won and he came second, or etc. We had lunch next day and we spoke about the competition and stuff. So I think that but that led to that, you know, in order to do this properly, you know, like everyone, I think, in, you know, whether you're a musician or you're a speaker, you're an actor, to do it on a top level, you need support. You need people to help you. You need people to trigger you, to set up things. Sitting at home reading books, tasting some wines, yeah, you can come some way, but you can't go all the way like that. But I think that's well, that's basically another subject, but I think that still has improved a lot. And I mean, young candidates today particularly seem much more prepared on preparing than 20 years ago.
Yeah, indeed. And I remember at the time Søren was still competing and coaching you at the same time in 2007 when you won.
And I mean, that's a good example. Søren never won any great titles himself. He won in Sweden, but not, you know, he went to Europe and the world. And I think that's, you know, I mean, he's a great sommelier. I like him. He's still working the floor and he does a great job. But I think that's also something, of course, you know, you have great football players and you have great football coaches. So the coaching and I mean, just like you have great restaurant managers, well, you have great restaurateur, and a great restaurateur is not necessarily the best chef. The best chef is not necessarily the greatest restaurateurs. So we had anyway a very, very nice, well, friendship basically. But then of course it led him to become, you know, do it more on a professional level and doing all the seminars around the world on the preparation, on the when I spoke about wines being A, B, or C level, that was something that was born out of this. You know, how should we do this? Should we just taste wine without knowing anything, or should we just sort them into categories? And yeah, so it was very fruitful those years coming to this, finding this preparation.
And I think there is little doubt today that he's arguably, you know, the top coach in the world. But I remember in 2007 he was still competing. But when you won, he was celebrating just as hard as you were, because he had been part of your team.
Yeah, exactly. And I think very much it's about teamwork. And it's just like because I remember some years later, you know, when I looked at the semis in Sweden, some of them, they were a bit, you know, they said, well, I'm not in this team. I'm not. Of course. We didn't. I didn't get anything for free. We created this, you know, with friends together. Let's go together. Let's train together. Let's do this. Let's do this. And then, you know, some younger people, they expected to have everything, just to be invited and have someone doing, you know, putting down many hours of work, you know, without being paid, basically for someone else, which is. So you always have to start by yourself, your own motivation and your own interest. And of course, the same thing if you want to join this good football team, or you know, you can't take everyone. You'd have to take those where you see potential.
Yeah,
Of course.
yeah. I mean, what you mentioned in terms of sharing, because I mean, you were competing, but the first thing that you did before you were competing was sharing. And I think that that's one thing that we never have to forget about it. You need to share. As soon as you share the knowledge, your time, your I mean, your techniques with some other colleagues, everybody grows. And then if you compete and someone wins, it's okay, but it's not versus competing and sharing. That's not. It's very interesting what you mentioned here. I mean, I agree with that. Andresito, perdón, ¿quieres preguntar algo más? Comentar algo más. No, okay. Guys, anyone else want to, Fernando, ¿quieres comentar algo? O alguien de aquí de los que están adentro quieren hacer una pregunta antes de despedir a Andreas?
Yo sí. Hola, Andreas. Te voy a hacer la pregunta en español. A ver qué tal nos va. Nada más, a mí me interesaría saber, entiendo que el tema de la cata obviamente es mucho el tema práctico, pero necesitas siempre una base para todo. ¿Y qué podrías recomendar hablando de libros o qué tipo de materiales adicionales que no tengan que ver con probar vinos te pueden servir como para tener por lo menos las bases, no sé, aromáticas de las uvas, como que lo básico?
Una pregunta muy difícil, ¿eh? Yo creo que un nivel de libros, there are so many interesting. I always say that most important wine book that I read was the World Atlas of Wine by Hugh Johnson, because that was the book you could read about all regions. Then, of course, to learn about Burgundy, you should buy the best book about Burgundy, which is probably now Jasper Morris, this Bible about Burgundy. But well, one thing which is interesting, still when I did my most preparation for the in terms of tasting, in terms of competition, I've read real books, not online. I think I remember better reading real books, because I think having something in your hand and reading it, I mean, I love technology, of course, internet and what we are able to do today thanks to technology. I love that a lot, but I think taking the time and reading a book, disconnecting from everything else, which is more about the mind of focusing. And in terms of knowing varieties, I also mentioned this book by Os Clark and Margaret Rand called Grapes and Vines, which is, I think, about learning the varieties and the styles of wine. And I mean, typical wines from, you know, the best or most typical wines being made from Cabernet, Syrah, Chardonnay, and so forth is in there. And of course, la cosa más importante es probar tanto vino posible.
Claro. Oye, y una pregunta
recordar y disfrutar.
No, eso indudablemente. Oye, y una pregunta adicional, esto más bien es como un tema, digamos que de percepción mía, tal vez nuestra, de Mark y mía. Últimamente hemos estado probando mucho té y nos hemos dado cuenta de que justo antes de probar vino, cuando hemos llegado a tomar té, como que sentimos un poco más la percepción sensorial de los propios vinos. Tú en particular tienes algo que hagas antes como para tratar de afinar mucho más tu nariz y tu gusto antes de los concursos?
No, para mí no. Yo conozco los degustadores que dicen que no es posible de beber café dos semanas antes de los concursos, no es posible. Para mí, beber el café la mañana es normal. Será más difícil sin el café la mañana. por ejemplo. Para preparar el nariz y la boca, para mí no. Me gusta mucho comer muy picante, por ejemplo, y no es un problema por degustar para mí.
Ok, gracias, Andrés.
Amigo, te agradezco, mi querido Andreas. Una última pregunta que quiero hacerte. The last question that I would like to ask you about contests, because I mean, when I was competing, one of the biggest problem that I had sometimes that I feel nervous, very nervous. Even if I knew what I was trying, I was tasting, with the nervous, it was very difficult for me. How do you manage your nervous when you are competing?
That's a very good question. And that's rather a question for a psychologist as well. It's not, I think that's beyond what a sommelier knows, but to me, it was a question about, I would say 1 year before the big final, I made up my mind to not be stressed in everyday life. I had some friends who helped me. I had a few, I was still working, but every morning I was running 10 kilometers. And of course, when you speak about, one example, I mentioned chess. I'm very interested in chess. I will never be great because I started too late, but I love to watch these geniuses doing it. Magnus Carlsen, who's the world champion in chess, he does 3-4 hours of sports every day. When he goes to a chess competition, the most important thing for him is to be able to play basketball because it cleans. Para limpiar la cabeza es la cosa más importante. I was running 10 kilometers every morning and I was thinking, being on that stage, not being nervous and seeing myself winning it. So I think it's about, taking out everyday stress, everyday problems, which is of course difficult to do, and focusing. I mean, I think that's very much like some people do meditation or when you prepare for something. So I think being in physical shape, getting out. I mean, thanks to the COVID last year, I had a lot of time to do that again. Coming down to earth, doing more exercise, and feeling that focus again. So I think not being out drinking is fun. It's important, but I think it's a mental question, and being in physically good shape and focusing and doing sports. And coming back to these chess players doing 3 or 4 hours a day, just because when you sit there, you have to play your game, or if you're on stage, you have to do your thing. If you're stressed, if you don't feel comfortable with yourself. But if you're really prepared to feel when you go on stage, you should feel like you're a model doing the catwalk. You should feel you're bright. You should feel that you're beautiful. I mean, it's a long way to go there, but technically, I mean, I must say again, coming back to the World Championship, once the finalists were announced and we were on stage, I never felt as collected my whole life. I knew that, this is it. And which is, I had, of course, before that, sometimes I was nervous. I was not, being fully focused. So I think it's just about, playing with your small,
with yourself.
with your brain and whatever you have in here and getting it to work. And of course, it's a lot of work behind that, which is not technically about the tasting. It's not technically about pouring wine or whatever. It's about the focus that I have to be bright. I have to be well rested. I have to have slept well. If I look good, if I feel good, I will sound good, and I would probably do a better job. So it's, I mean, when you watch Rocky, when he was running, and he was doing his, and he was Rocky.
I know. Wow, thank you, my friend. A lot of nice tips that you gave us today. I really admire you because I mean, besides the person that you are and the summit of the world and things like that, you're still very humble guy, and even if you do primos tasting and you have the access of all these kind of things, I think that you're always available to share your knowledge as you are doing today, and that's impressive. That's what I always will say. That thank you, gracias amigo. Pilar, ¿quieres decir algo?
I just want to ask you something. At what time you taste?
At what time?
Usually, at what time during the day? What is the best hour?
Always before lunch. And I mean, even if I taste, let's say I draw the line, but you know, somewhere at 100 wines a day, if you should write and do it properly. 80 to me is perfect when I can plan the schedule. I start early, and I do everything before lunch, because having lunch, coming back in the afternoon, and that's not a question about mouth or nose, as some people believe. It's a question of la cabeza. If you're tired, you can't really focus. And I mean, honestly, el mejor copa de vino es el primero copa al día, a las 11 de la mañana. Always when you drink your first glass, because I mean, this is a sidestep from your question, but you know, when I have the opportunity to meet friends and drink good wine, we never do dinners anymore. Particularly last year when we had all this bloody time off, the only thing I was doing was emptying my cellar and cooking at home, and always for lunch, because in the evening you had a long day behind you, you're tired. It's nice with dinner, but for lunch, your first glass of champagne, you sit down, you're not tired, a nice meal, bottle after bottle. Wine tastes better in the morning, or you know, midday.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, thank you, Pili. Thank you, amigo. Thank you very much for this conversation. It's been a pleasure always to have this kind of conversations with you, and the people here that is going to be in the blind tasting thing. So I think that they learn a lot today about the comments that you gave us. And thank you very much for your support. For sure, I will.
La próxima mes se va a ver muy pronto. Me gustaría volver pronto, yo creo que en Chile en febrero.
Febrero en Chile, sí, sí.
Por el concurso de mejor sommelier de Américas.
Perfecto.
Y Argentina.
Argentina también, y México muy pronto también.
Sí, pronto, verás que sí, te voy a invitar muy pronto, más pronto de lo que canta un gallo, así decimos en México. Querido amigo, te mando un fuerte abrazo, cuídate mucho, sigue compartiendo tus conocimientos con todo el mundo. Thank you very much for this conversation, and I really appreciate your support all the time.
Por el concurso de degustación también.
Thank you, thank you. Well, Martin Bruno is saying, thank you very much, Mark, Andreas. It was a great conversation. Thank you, Martin Bruno. Saludos hasta Argentina también. Well, thank you, my friends. It's been a pleasure to be with you this afternoon in Mexico, this evening in Stockholm. So I hope to see you very soon, my friend, Andreas.
26 degrees.
It's not bad, huh? It's not bad.
This evening, yeah.
Okay.
What are you drinking, Andreas? No drink?
DT.
Same.
I was preparing actually to do this tomorrow, to do this bloody thing in Spanish. I was writing down, and then says, well, it's today actually. So I was, otherwise I would have a nice glass of wine, and you know.
No problem. We will do it again. Don't worry.
Yeah, with pleasure.
Thank you, my friend. Well, gracias, mis queridos amigos. Gracias, Andrés, Rosberg, Pilar, Lance, Olivier, Fer, Rodrigo y todos los que están ahí atrás. Gracias por haber estado. Gracias, Andreas Larsson. Nos vemos pronto en alguna parte del mundo. Te mando un fuerte abrazo, querido.
Gracias, cabrón.
Gracias, cabrón.
Gracias.
Un abrazo. Bye, Andrés.
Chao.